I'm Teresa Binken, CEO of National Speakers Bureau Canada and Global Speakers Agency. We're one of the original speakers bureaus in North America, celebrating 50 years of service. And we envision that the sharing of ideas inspires action to make the world a better place through bringing you our expert speakers and thought leaders for your conferences, training programs, and events. NSB has the key. We help you unlock possibility in your personal and professional lives and for your teams. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker. Sarain Fox. She is a powerhouse activist, a broadcaster, and a filmmaker from the Anishinaabe community. And in this time of challenge and change, we thought Sarain would be a great speaker to bring with you as she offers a path forward. Sarain brings a rare combination of award-winning storytelling, activism, and lived experience, challenging the way we think about sustainability, community, and trust. And a few highlights from her impressive career. You've likely seen her as a judge on Canada's Drag Race in 2025. She's a winner of the 2024 Canadian Screen Award for Best Interviewer. She's founder of Landback Studios, focusing on authentic Indigenous storytelling, and she's been host of APTN's Future History and Viceland's Rise. You may have also seen her in the larger-than-life presence in Sephora's We Belong to Something Beautiful campaign, or Nick's recent ad spotlighted in New York's Times Square. With her blend of cultural pride, media savvy, and activism, Sarain Fox is changing the narrative across the country, one story at a time. Please join me in welcoming Sarain Fox on the power of advocacy and finding the light. Welcome, Sarain.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It is such an honor to be here today, and always an honor to be repped by the NSB. So thank you for having me here today. I'm going to get started with everyone. Those of you who are just joining, I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to start in the traditional way. Welcome to my backdrop. This is a beautiful Indigenous presence right away, but I want to take the opportunity to introduce myself. Bojo Wabanan Ongo Quain Disnakas Wabazation Dodam Anishinaabe Quain Dao Bachuana and Donjaban Niso Madewion. That is how I introduce myself. And for me, that introduction is revolutionary. And I grew up with a mom who raised me to acknowledge who I am in this way and to use that introduction in any way that I can and when I can. And I will share with all of you that it isn't until very recently, maybe the last decade, that I have actually been using that introduction all the time, no matter what, in all spaces that I show up in. And the reason I said it is a revolutionary act is because I believe that to be true. We know that there were policies put in place in this country that directly impacted Indigenous people's ability to pass on their languages, for us to know our songs and dances, and to know the land and our history and who we are. So just acknowledging it at the top allows my ancestors to hear that and for all of us to start in a good way. I am coming to all of you virtually from just outside of Toronto, north of Toronto, and this is Anishinaabe territory. And the closest community is Rama, which is not too far, Chippewas, and there is Georgina, Christian Island, very close as well. So I have been doing this work, sharing stories to create connection, to find moments where we can come together and learn more about one another. And that introduction, the power of introduction, is how I first started this journey. I realized that simple teaching that was handed down to me from my mom and from her grandma and her great grandma and from my dad's side as well allowed me to break the ice, to acknowledge the elephant in the room perhaps, and directly speak to who I am. And I realized in my journey, no matter where I went, there was such a different space that was created when we didn't have mutual introductions. And so I started to wonder what would happen if the settler communities around me also started to introduce themselves in this way. I really started to get curious about the history, the stories that everyone's ancestors carry. And I really do believe that everyone's ancestors are waiting to hear their names. They're waiting for their ancestors to call out who they are, to share their stories. And I think we so often can be deeply impacted by other people's history, other people's stories. And the reason it impacts us is because it resonates. And so why not then be impacted by your own, to dig deep into the history of who came before you and how they fought for you to be here today. And so over the last 5 years, I've really seen an incredible amount of work happen in this space of wondering what it looks like to immediately speak who we are. To give an example, in my very first TED Talk, there's this antidote that's kind of become, viral, if you'll say. And if you're from the GTA, this one might resonate. But imagine I tell my whole introduction in the way that I just did, and then you come back and you say, "Oh, hey, I'm Mandy from Markham." Well, you can't just be Mandy from Markham because, well, I want to know where you were from before then, and how did you arrive here in this moment, and what is the story that got you here? And yes, sometimes these stories can be incredibly difficult to share. And as someone with an incredibly complex history as an Indigenous person living in this country, I totally understand how immediately diving into something that might be complex and triggering is a huge risk. But I challenge you this. We are in a moment together in society where everything seems like a big risk. Perhaps you're tuning in today and maybe you've been doing DEI work. You've been at the front lines, really making change in your organizations, in your municipalities, your cities, your communities, in your own lives. Maybe that's the work you've dedicated your life to and you've seen the impact like I have. And maybe in this moment, as we look around, we're wondering, how does that work even matter? How do we move forward? Is all of this even still relevant? In fact, I'm in a moment where I had to ask myself, as an advocate, as an activist, as an Indigenous storyteller, is my voice meaningful and relevant in this moment? And that comes from a place of fear, a place of, well, maybe all of you can identify with this. That imposter syndrome that seems to be just, sitting right here, right behind your shoulder, always constantly threatening to say maybe you're not worthy, or your ideas aren't big enough, or you are not strong enough to do it alone, or to make it happen in a group or community. All of those things that were there, maybe you were able to push aside in moments where our future is questioned, they creep back in. And for me, I realized when I was wondering, am I relevant? Well, I'm a human being. A human being is always relevant. But when I was questioning my voice and the impact of my platform, I realized that we must all be in this place of transition where we wonder who we are and how we move forward and how our work continues to resonate and continues to create the change that we so all want and that we want for the future generations that are here and that are coming. And so, diversity, equity, and inclusion has literally shaped the world that I live in right now as a mother. And I had to touch on this because I think in this moment where hopelessness can be at the forefront, we have to remember how far we've come. And as an advocate, as an activist, this might not be something you expected me to say, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge the accomplishments that we've made. Since the pandemic and what happened with the entire uprising of Black Lives Matter, it seemed like the world, maybe because of the pandemic, where there was a moment where we were all able to breathe and to sit back and take in social media in a way that we had never done before. There was an uprising of eyes that reached out on social media and saw injustice in a way that had never been broadcast to the world in that way. People picked up phones and went live, and they became the eyes on the ground, and it controlled the way the media was allowed to show the world. So there was this absolute uprising and epiphany, a moment of complete change. Just before that, we also saw the same moment with Indigenous people at Standing Rock. And for those of you who don't know what Standing Rock is, it was the largest gathering of Indigenous people to stand up for water in over 100 years. And thousands of people came to North Dakota and they gathered on the banks of the Cannonball River. This was a movement led by young women who so desperately wanted to ensure that their children and their community had access to clean, safe drinking water. And what was threatening that was a pipeline. And so there was this uprising. And again, we saw people pick up their phones and go live, and they became the media that was broadcast into the world. It changed the narrative because people were seeing us in our own land, through our own eyes for perhaps the first time ever in that way. And so during the pandemic, when this happened again, we had an uprising of access and support and people and organizations who wanted to do this work, who leaned into diversity, equity, inclusion. They created space and meaningful representation. And there was a wave that led to Indigenous people having more representation than we've ever seen before, whether it be in film and television or right here. I can tell you as a speaker, I had the immense privilege to speak to all kinds of organizations and into groups and places and spaces I never imagined my voice would resonate, that I would be allowed to take up space. And now we have more Indigenous young people in the mainstream than ever before. We have more Indigenous politicians and authors, and I think maybe the most meaningful representation we've ever had. And so then here we are. We did it. We made all of this headway to get to this one moment where we realized that we actually aren't as far as we thought. And we know that to be true because we look around and we see so many are unsafe. In Canada, we are coming in just weeks away from an election. And I know many people, no matter where they stand on the political spectrum, are fearful. Because the only consistent thing in this world is change. And yet it is change and change alone that is the most scary, the most uprooting of all. We're terrified of what it looks like when change is at our doorstep. And yet, look what this change has brought us. If you're in Canada right now and you look around, perhaps you're seeing fellow Canadians stand up in a way you haven't seen before. Perhaps now you're going to your local market and you've met your neighbor. You're going to the coffee shop around the corner instead of the one from maybe down south. No matter what it looks like, there is a moment right now, just like the ones I've experienced so many times as an activist and as an Indigenous person of color, where the threat of turmoil brings us together. And the threat of change changes our hearts and minds to have a different perspective. So right now, when I look out onto the horizon and I wonder, for me as an Indigenous woman in this country, how do I continue to have a voice that is heard, that sings out from the rooftops and continues to be a voice for my ancestors? I am reminded of the same teaching that brought me here. Right now, all of us are being asked to reintroduce, or perhaps for the very first time, introduce ourselves. Whether it be when we show up to vote, we introduce our beliefs and what we stand for. We introduce our ideas and what we believe will be for the future, our future, for our families, for our workplace, for our communities, our cities, our children, great-grandchildren, and beyond. We're going to show up and we're going to say who we are to the world. You're going to let your neighbors know how much you love your home, your sovereignty, and all of the rights that we so have fought for, that we are reminded every day that we are so lucky to have. And perhaps it's just that. For a really long time, perhaps Canadians have been so nice that we forgot how nice it is. How nice it is to have freedom, to have the ability to tune in on this Zoom and to hear different ideas and perspectives, to have an Indigenous voice join you at lunch. And perhaps it's also this. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission tour this country. We have 94 calls to action, and those 94 calls to action don't exist anywhere else in the world. We had Biden in just days before his presidency ended in the United States. He chose to do two incredible, incredible things. The first thing that he chose to do was to, like Canada has done many years ago, almost a decade, more than a decade ago, promised to make sure that the American public knew about the residential school system that, just like Canada, existed in the US, and they had a formal apology that took place. And he granted clemency to Leonard Peltier, one of the longest standing political prisoners in the US, that many Indigenous people have been fighting for his release for many, many years. And so you have this moment of hope. And I'm sure many of you had no idea that this happened. So remember that even when there is incredible turmoil, there is always light. And you always have the opportunity to say, this is who I am, and this is what I believe in. And this belief that I have in myself, in my voice, and in my story is what I will introduce to the world, is what will carry us into the future. Again, might be like, oh yeah, that sounds really nice. I'm just going to introduce myself, but I want you all to try it in your own space right now. Imagine in this moment where the world is in an immense change and where it can be hard to imagine how you're even going to program meaningful content into the world that you are working in. Ask yourself this. What have I already woven into what I believe? And what is waiting for me to weave back into the future? Right now, all of those hopes and ideas and dreams are still standing right there. And the world is asking us, who are you? What do you believe in? And how are you going to bring us into the future? And Canadians will lead the way, because we are walking as the only country that has apologized to Indigenous people and who has made a mandate, calls to action, and a roadmap. And so for me, I think there's never been a more exciting time to be led in a moment where we are so intertwined in communities in a way we've never seen before. So this is the moment where diversity, equity, inclusion is not an office. It's not a talk in June, although I'll show up if you want me there. But it's a fundamental idea of who we are. So when the world says, who is Canada? We know individually every one of us is carrying the stories of our truth, of our history, and the fabric of who we were, who we have been, and who we are going to be in the future. The leaders of truth and hope and light and fundamental human rights that will be unstoppable, unmovable, and something that we can stand and be proud as Indigenous people have for thousands and thousands and thousands of years as the caretakers of this land. So Chimigwech, I want to thank you all for being here, and I do want to open it up for questions, and I want to be sacred about our time because I know this is a luncheon. So I promised Indigenous timing, 20 minutes and 10 minutes of Q&A. So I actually think that the opportunity to have dialogue in the end has been the most meaningful part of being able to connect with people in this way through Zoom and in real life. So I encourage you to not be shy and to ask anything, even unrelated to the talk, that might allow us to have some meaningful dialogue. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you, Sarain. Really thoughtful, and you painted such a picture that I know for me gave me inspiration to move forward. And I can see in the chat you've also inspired a number of the audience to rethink the way that they introduce themselves and take pride in their history as well as what they're thinking going forward. So thank you for that. And indeed, we do welcome questions. A question, Sarain, you give some great examples of the way that we can show up as individuals, especially when it comes to voting and in our communities and in our neighborhoods. Can you speak a bit as well about what you think organizations and leadership in organizations can do to bring some of this light forward?
Absolutely. I think the most impactful thing that organizations can do is to not follow trends. Because I think the trend right now is to sort of wait and see where we're going, and then create sort of more strategic planning for where you're going to go. And I think if you have a really dynamic, robust team that's been working on something specific that may not be trending, like DEI, that don't follow that trend, stay true to who you are and your original DNA, if I can say that, and fight for it. Because I think the most impactful way that people can show up is consistency. And so when the world feels like it's pushing against you, if you are consistent in who you are and who you've always been and the work that you're proud of, I think that consistency is something that many people look to as a sign of safety and leadership, you know?
Thank you for that. Another question.
Hello, I'm seeing everyone's hellos too from the chat.
Another question kind of tied into that is sometimes it can be challenging to be vocal, and especially if it's not with the trends. Can you speak a bit about how you overcome some of that in terms of some of the tools or techniques or philosophies that you use to help you move through some challenging times?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just to honor that question, I think right now there's so much conversation, and I think the beauty and hardship of social media is that we get to share all of our stories, and sometimes those stories can actually make a lot of us afraid. I'll give you a personal example. I was terrified. I do a lot of my work in the US, and of course I've been terrified to cross the border, fly into the US, continue to do the things that I love and that I want to do in work. And I think that I did read a lot of stories of experiences that people have. And so then I allowed this fear to really build up. And of course, now I've crossed the border several times, and not to dismiss anything that's happening. I just want to acknowledge that sometimes just continuing to move forward and give yourself the lived experience that you're afraid of is the best way to sort of move against that fear. So I was really afraid to do it. So I had to try it for myself. And the other thing is that going forward into that position, I had all of the things you could possibly imagine, so much paperwork, all of the things that they might ask for. And so that's the next thing I would say is I'm a Virgo. So my go-to prep is always to be over-prepared, to have something that makes me feel safe. So no matter what your situation is, you'll have some roadmap for you that makes you feel safe. What do you need to have for that? Is that plan A, B, C that you go to, that you've thoroughly thought through all of these different possibilities and you have sort of run yourself through that. So nothing sort of, well, there'll always be something that catches you by surprise, but you try to create scenarios. For me, that kind of roadblocking planning is really important for me. Just what are the possibilities that could happen here, and how do I imagine myself? I guess maybe because I'm a storyteller, literally role playing, like, oh, well, if I'm afraid of the border, what could they ask me and what could they say, and how can I make sure that I'm safe and that I have a plan for all of the things that could happen. So.
Thank you. Yes, and I know we're experiencing that and making sure that all of our speakers that are crossing the border have the confidence that you need to get through
just being
it.
Real,
Yes, safely. And I think one last question. Touching on, we started off this discussion with some reference to caring for the land, and wanted to get some of your perspective around that, especially with April as Earth Month and some of the passion that you have for caring for our land.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. You might have heard me almost say it. I didn't want to I don't know where we are politically, but I'm an elbows up person. I'm like, I feel like it's very interesting because in this patriotic moment, we can actually really come together as Indigenous communities and back to the land people, because the one thing that I almost always have in common, even if we don't agree politically, sometimes is this love for this incredible landscape that Canada has. You know, we have some of the cleanest, freshest water in the world, and that water is worth more than gold. And so I hate to commodify it, but that literally is where we're moving in the world, is that we have to protect those things that care for life. And so for me, clean water, making sure that our lands remain pristine and that we follow, I think the best way to protect land is to allow the original caretakers to continue to care for the land. But that being said, it's April. I feel like we can really get in this dream space where the most perfect land is somewhere else. And I'm in Oro-Medonte. We're just recovering from an incredible natural disaster, the ice storm. And when I look around, what I know is the most pristine, beautiful place is drastically affected, you know, when you see trees down. And I know that when the land changes like that, sometimes it can make people want to protect it less. And so just to pass on this lesson that I'm learning right now is that we can't just protect the most pristine, beautiful places. We need to protect the neighborhood park that's at the end of the street that's getting infringed upon. You know, we need to protect our own backyards and, you know, that maybe not so clean stream that runs through the back of the city. We need to protect that too and try to bring it back to health. So just like human beings, we're not trying to protect people in their best, shiniest moment. We want to protect everyone, even when they're not showing up in their best, brightest way, and be advocates and voices for the land, because she can't, well, I think she's speaking very clearly for herself right now with the weather, but, you know, we need to be a voice for her to continue to advocate for the protection and the community role that can take for urban communities as well.
Thank you, Sarain. This has been a really special opportunity to hear some of what you've been going through lately and how that informs your view of what's happening across the country, as well as picking up on how you're sensing others are feeling. And you just know how to articulate it so well and give us some of the tools and ideas about how to show up and speak up and introduce ourselves and who we are and what we believe in. So thank you so much for this. I again see some of the comments. Thank you so much for those coming in. Tuesday, Johnson McDonald from Six Nations.
Awesome.
Yes, and really appreciate.
I will say hi to my mom. I saw that comment. I love my mom too. Thank you so much, Teresa.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining us and your support throughout the chat. We would be so happy to bring Sarain to your organization's next event to share this message with your team. So feel free to reach out and we can help make that happen. We will see a number of you if you are in the GTA likely. Next, we will be at Canadian Special Events Live. Coming up soon, and we are sponsoring B. Kwame. She has a brand new book out, The Book of Possibilities, and so much of what we believe in, and actually one of our core values, is pursue possibility. And speakers like Sarain and B really bring this to life. So looking forward to seeing a number of you there, and we will follow up today's session with a recording and some of the takeaways, and look forward to working with you soon. I would love for everyone to sing from the rooftops, as Sarain encouraged. Take care. Enjoy the day. Thanks.
Thank you so much.